Hello and welcome to our bite-sized recording on formative assessment in the health and science T levels. My name is Tracy and just a little bit of background about myself. I come from teaching NFE and teaching health and social care, and I've brought that sort of knowledge with me and applied that to the provider development team to help support providers through their T level journey with teaching and delivery through consultations and CPD events. I'm also joined by Marina, who is going to now introduce herself.
Thank you, Tracy. So, hello everyone and welcome. My name is Marina, and I am, like Tracy, also a member of the provider development team. So, our goal as provider development officers is to support you with the teaching and delivery of the T level health and science qualification. So, my background, I come from a predominantly science background. I have a PhD in neuroscience with a medical research focus. So, really focusing on that science and that applied science to health. Thanks, Tracy.
Thank you. So, a little overview of what today's aim of today's session is. So, it's about supporting you in your planning and supporting your students through different formative assessments. We'll also share some strategies with you, and we'll explore how to use formative assessment to develop skills that are both important to vocational and the academic world. So what we're going to start with, first of all, is just an overview of formative assessment. So bringing it back to basics. So I'm going to recap and run through some definitions. The first example you can see highlights the need for assessments to take place as learning is happening. This reinforces the need for the activity to be ongoing and explains how it differs from summative assessment. The second example brings in the range and variety of methods teachers can use, and I think this is really important. If we over rely on the same assessment method, this could demotivate our students and also disadvantage some, depending on their preferred learning style and support needs. The final example brings in the need for assessment activities to be contextualised, which is important, but also used to assess our students' characteristics, which I think is an interesting point and implies a more holistic approach to formative assessment. I also think that the reference to it taking place at several times during a course refers to that more formal formative assessment activities. As I suggest that formative assessment could take place extremely regularly in every contact we have with our students in a more informal context. We use ongoing assessment activities to constantly check for understanding and rates of progress. And this also includes the depth of learning for individuals and informs our future teaching, learning and assessment practice. So what is the purpose of formative assessment? So this is about getting work-ready, skilled students, because formative assessment should extend beyond knowledge, especially for two vocations that are high need of skills. The second factor relates to retention of knowledge, not only for the exams in the following summer or autumn, but applying and reviewing them on an ongoing basis. We need to remember the importance of the development of wider skills, knowledge, competencies, and confidence, the other and very important abilities needed in the industry, whilst remembering to assess the individual breadth and depth of learning required for employment and success. So your formative assessment activities will capture this journey for each student. They will track how the students progress in their learning, including their industry placement, which interventions, support, additional learning activities and staff are involved as also. Reviewing progress against their individual targets. Each organisation has their own tracking system with the results of initial and diagnostic assessments, existing quals, ILPs, targets and learning goals. So how you do this is really up to you. What's important is that ongoing progress and development is tracked. Each student's journey is documented and they know exactly what they need to do to progress and excel in each aspect of their programme. A powerful method that can address the majority of the AFL 5 key strategies is live marking. Live marking puts a greater emphasis on verbal dialogue that is scripted and targeted to help students improve their work. This means that students can instantly act upon the feedback, all the while significantly reducing written marking for the teacher. Live marking permits the teacher to give students concise, regular feedback that can be acted on immediately. I'm aware that some of you may be governed by your marking policy and understand that for Ofsted purposes, progress is not evident in this situation. Therefore, yellow box marking can overcome this issue, as it is a more targeted approach to marking that ensures teachers and students focus on a specific area of work rather than the entire piece. That encourages teachers' feedback to be diagnostic and support improvement. The area of work is clearly marked, focusing on key marking points. A 2020 study found that learners valued verbal feedback over written feedback. And it was stated students who received verbal feedback perceived the feedback to be better in terms of quality, use, quantity, and timing, and usefulness compared to students who received written feedback. This can come from peer or self feedback and makes the feedback instant, immediately actionable, and you get formative feedback, as you will see if there are common errors of content you need to readdress. The final idea is to consider regarding feedback is the key idea of repeating content, intervals between teaching and feedback and activities. Linked to ideas of formative assessment, how do you know? But more importantly, your students know that they have retained new knowledge and understand how to retrieve it and use and apply across a subject area. So here are some examples of formative assessments you could use. Thinking and linking grids are an excellent resource for retrieval, as well as making links between to see that deeper understanding. You can start with definitions, using 2 dice to select numbers, half fill out the table, get the students to complete it, then using the links to find and link the 2 words. Walkabout bingo can assess understanding. This task encourages students to talk to one another, going beyond the typical think, pair and share, as they have to engage with different members of the class. It's very simple to create and also very adaptable, and students can only ask their peers one question each. They record the students' answers and name and then move on. The first person to have all their answers filled shouts bingo. Next, we have expand and elaborate. This allows for the higher justification, where you give students different statements and get students to go beyond the definition description. And finally, we have misconception retrieval. This is a great way to start learners with common areas that are either incorrect or not fully expanded, with the view that students need to relay the correct answer with supporting evidence. I'm now going to pass you to Marina, who is going to have a little look in more detail at developing core skills.
Thank you, Tracy. So core skills are a very important part of the TQ and are assessed in the ESP. So there are 5 assessment outcomes for the ESP. If we look here and see AO2, we see that focuses on the pathway core skills. And this, the contribution of this varies depending on the pathway, from just under 47% to over 56% for the score for this assessment. This highlights that importance of the application of vocational skills and not just the application of knowledge, because we're talking around 50% contributing to that core skill grade. It's also important to note, though, that we have AO4, which is the effective use of our general competency frameworks. That's the English, maths and digital skills. And AO5, which is that focusing on the evaluation and that reflection of those skills. So the core skills for each pathway are outlined in the specification. Each pathway has a unique set of core skills. We can see here the core skills for health, for science, and for healthcare science. So some of them have specific core skills. So for example, health is the only pathway that has demonstrating person-centered care. But then some of them have got core skills that go across all 3. So for example, communication is in health science and healthcare science. But it's important to look at the specification for your specific T level, because the specification breaks down each skill further and tells you exactly what the students need to know for that skill. You can embed these skills throughout your first year of delivery, and we will cover this later in the session. So at the moment, if we were to look at the sample assessments, we can see here an overview of the ESP tasks. So this is just a sort of quick overview. We won't be going through these as we have other resources and support on this available. But here you can see in this table, each of the core skills is highlighted and mapped towards the tasks. So we have, for example, in health, the role play task maps to core skill 1 and core skill 2. You can also see the importance in science for having that project diary. So in science, the ESP, there's a project diary for each stage, and that helps students contribute to their reflective task at the end. So what can we do to help support our students, help develop these core skills and incorporate that into our formative assessment? Well, one thing you can get ready and use from day one of your teaching are the proformas. So the proformas are what are supplied with the assessments that you can use, as students can use, as templates to fill in for their answers. These are available on QualHub and you can use them or adapt them for your teaching to develop your students' core skills. And this also has that added benefit of you're helping improve students' confidence because you're gaining them familiarity with material they'll be using or similarly using in the assessment. So examples we have here are the reflective account, proforma from health, the risk assessment from the science, and the feedback from peer discussion from healthcare science. So you could incorporate these into your teaching and delivery, and you could use them to formatively assess your students. So for example, you could have students cover a new topic and then do a peer discussion around a question on that topic, and then fill in the feedback from peer discussion pro forma in healthcare science. Then looking at that, you could see, if you were to do this incrementally, you could see how students would progress and develop those peer discussion and those writing and reflective skills. So some other ways we have to develop the core skills in your students, like we've just said, using those performers throughout the years. You have recording readiness or camera readiness. So for some ESP tasks, students have to be audio visually recorded. This can be quite nerve-wracking for students, it can be quite nerve-wracking for most people. So getting our students comfortable demonstrating those core skills whilst also being recorded can be very helpful. And you can even incorporate that in your formative assessment. Record students doing a task or a presentation maybe 2 or 3 times throughout the year, one in each term, and then our students look back and reflect on this afterwards and they can also incorporate those reflections. We also have things like questioning techniques, again, that reflection, so both peer and self-reflection. Group discussion, so that balance between speaking and listening, and we'll discuss some resources about that in a moment. That reflective diary for science, and those professional posters and presentations. Now that's a big one because not only is that something that you can use as part of your formative assessment and something that's used in summative assessment, it's also something they'll be using a fair lot in the industry. So getting them to practice that, getting them more comfortable will help your students become far more work ready. And then we have a specific example relating just to the science pathways. This is to the statistics. We have the Chief Examiner's report from the Summer 2022 series states that several students lost marks due to failure to draw conclusions from any statistical analyses performed. So this is important that we're not getting students to just do statistics. It's knowing what those results mean and how they inform on conclusions. So embedding statistics as part of scientific life and encouraging students to view these as a tool to answer questions and not just a tick box activity. So if we incorporate that and use that through formative assessment, we can further embed this idea and this knowledge that stats is a tool, much like practical experimentation or quantitative or questioning. So ways we can do that is analyzing data. We have data all the time. So you could have class data, looking at mean results in a quiz, for example. Doing observed versus expected results for the class. So here we're talking chi-squared. And looking at ranges of different readings, so asking students, are some measures more reliable than others, and maybe using stats to inform that. So as we develop these statistical skills, we can also formatively assess our students as we go. So now I'm going to hand back to Tracy.
Thank you, Marina. So we're going to focus a little bit more on developing exam and academic skills. And this is an area that's, that has been reported that students are at a lower level due to the pandemic. So it is really important that we think of different ways and look at different ways that can maybe really help support students and sort of bring them back onto that par with their peers pre-pandemic. So first of all, we're going to have a little look at some ideas through STEM learning. So STEM learning has a variety of sources and CPDs and ideas and reading material all around developing metacognitive skills. So in simple terms, metacognitive skills, this is the ability of a student to monitor, direct and review their own learning. There are also exam wrappers. So this is about going beyond just the grade. It's about students of identifying their own individual areas of strengths and weaknesses to guide further study. It's about students reflecting on the adequacy of their preparation time and the appropriateness of their study strategies, and characterising the nature of their errors to find any recurring patterns that could be addressed. And there are some CPD which I've highlighted here, so metacognition and self-regulated learning in science, which you can take part in. And even though if you are focusing and you are a teacher of health, the fundamentals of these development of self-regulated learning and resilience will still also apply to the health qualification. So let's have a little explore of how do we develop those student exam skills. So it's about the students being familiar with keywords in the specification. This is important because the word itself can be awarded a mark rather than an alternative word that may or not get credit. It also helps prepare students to apply their knowledge to unfamiliar situations to prevent them from being confused when they see a question that does not relate directly to what they have learned. Getting students really to use past papers and examiner reports. So really understand it, highlighting it, talking about it, discussing these past papers and examiner reports, really understanding what the assessment is asking from them and how they can respond to that. Getting students prepared to apply their knowledge to unfamiliar situations. So getting them out of that sort of tunneled vision of, oh, how do I apply radiation to health? Well, actually, how else do you apply radiation to the real world? That fundamental key AO1 is still the same, but it's being able to see the knowledge and see how it's relevant in all parts of the world. Peer assessments, so getting students to work together in groups, assessing how they've done in an exam, or even answering, say, an AO2 question, so a real application question at the end of a lesson. So answering it and then getting each student to peer assess of how well they've actually think they've answered it. What else could they have included? How was their written language? So their English literacy, did they answer it well? Was their grammar great? Because remember those general written competencies is part of that. So actually, how well did they answer that question? Creating questions. Creating revision resources, so mind maps, quizzes, questions, cue cards, getting each student in a group to maybe create a different one and then share the resources. Another way that students can also prepare is using model answers. So Dr. Newland from the Western Sydney University researched using exemplars, and he found that learners actually want exemplars and find them useful. If learners do a piece of work, they have to wait for it to be marked and feedback given, where exemplars help them to identify their own weaknesses. They lead to an improvement in learner performance, and exemplars can make the criteria and standards very transparent, and it makes it more tangible to the learners as it is set in context. The drawbacks is they could lead to a lack of creativity or plagiarism from your learners, and this can be time consuming to produce. You may find it useful to use the sample papers and the mark schemes, as well as the indicative content, as a guide for the production of questions with model answers. We've produced some exemplification material for the occupational specialism synoptic assessments, but some of those can be used with your students now. Here is an example from laboratory science in regards to model answers. where this is an example of a pass level standard operating procedure. You could have students evaluate this, identify positives, and suggest improvements. They could even peer review each other's evaluations. Then you could give students the distinction example for comparison. As mentioned earlier, Dylan Williams encourages students to be owners of their own learning, to act as an instructional resource for each other, and providing feedback that moves learning forward. The employer set project also requires some peer review and self-reflection tasks, so you can use the performers from those tasks and just adapt them for use in your learning, as mentioned previously by Marina. In this way, you'll be getting double information, peer and or self-assessment for that specific activity they're doing in class. And as Marina said earlier, it's really getting them used to using the performers and giving them really good insight in how they actually might perform on these tasks for the ESP. So let's have a little look further at developing those academic skills. So we're going to start with written communication. So written communication was a key area that students struggled with in the summer 22 exam series. Continuous formative assessment in this area will prepare students for the ESP, but also the written communication needed in the exams. How to structure written assessments, linking, justifying, evaluating, with proofreading a key component that is needed, and how time should be allocated to this in assessment. Who is the written communication for? So who is the audience? So how do they communicate in a professional manner? A key area of focus also could be how to communicate in time constraints so that academic skills are kept high when time allowed in assessment is not unlimited. We also have some examples here of verbal communication. So really developing those verbal communication skills. This is key throughout the ESP task and was an area that, again, students did have some struggles with in the summer 22 series. And I think that's quite normal for 16, 17-year-olds. You know, they do get shy, they do get anxious with that verbal communication, and it's a skill that needs to develop just like written skills. And we want to focus on developing those verbal academic skills and also tracking our student progress. Role plays is a really great thing to introduce straight away. It helps, you can look at how do students introduce themselves to patients, as that's a key area that was missed in the standardised patient role plays. So do they even remember to say hello, ask how the patient is, and check that they are okay throughout the role play. This goes beyond just having mocks, although these are very valuable. You could ask students to present an area of the core content aimed at different audience, such as peers, a supervisor, or a child. Incorporate mini group discussions and observe how students communicate with another. Better still, get them to reflect on their own and others' communication skills. So I'm now going to pass you back to Marina, who is going to have a little chat with you about assessment objectives.
Thank you, Tracy. So yes, with our understanding of the assessment objectives, we can use this to help inform our formative assessment. So looking at helping with the core exams, so we have assessment objectives for the ESP and we have assessment objectives for the core exams. The core exams have got 3 AOs. The first being to demonstrate knowledge and understanding. The second, applying that knowledge and understanding. And then the third, analysing and evaluating. The relative proportions of these vary for the 3 pathways, but you'll see that for all 3 of them, the majority is that AO2 applying. So it is by understanding these core assessments and we're getting our students to understand them, we can help with improving their performance, but also tracking this through formative assessment. So I'm going to use an example to demonstrate this. So if you were to take a section of the specification, this is an example from the science specification. This is A4.17, how to decontaminate a range of common scientific equipment and substances. The specification details the points and gives some examples. Now we can use this to create exam style questions to formatively assess our students. So if we start with an AO1 style question, AO1, demonstrating knowledge and understanding, recalling you could create questions of list 3 methods by which scientific equipment and substances can be decontaminated. And that would then, the answers of which would be one of those 3 of those 5 bullet points. There's also a couple of more examples on here, and you could use these to structure questions around or to help your students structure questions around. We now move into AO2 style questions. So these are that harder, these are the applying knowledge. They often involve a scenario. So for example, we have here, Amina routinely uses metal forceps to transfer substances. It's important these substances are completely sterile. After use, she must decontaminate the forceps. Choose a suitable decontamination method she could use and explain the reasons for your choice. So we're here getting that higher demand, that more marked questions. To do this, students need to not just be able to recall the 5 decontamination methods, but also understand their purposes and how they would be used in terms of decontaminating. So for example, incineration wouldn't be appropriate because it's reusing metal forceps, whereas other examples such as sterilization would be. Now we'll go on to an AO3 style question. So this is that analyze and evaluate. Again, taking that same section of the specification, we could have Shen uses dissolution to clean something specified. And then what are the implications of this? So you could either give an example where it's a good choice and say this is appropriate because, or maybe where it's a bad choice, where it's inappropriate, like using incineration to clean reusable metal forceps. And getting those students to analyze and evaluate to gain those higher style marks. We additionally have extended response questions. Now, these are those high mark questions that target all 3 assessment objectives, but also carry marks for quality of written communication. So we can see an example here from the quality of written communication from the mark scheme and those different band points. And again, getting your students to understand where these marks come from and how they can demonstrate them can be really helpful with preparing them for their assessments. Here's an example of an extended response question that I've created again from this section of the specification. It details a scenario. So a pharmaceutical company uses a variety of processes. They typically use an autoclave to sterilize their equipment. Then in this scenario, the autoclave breaks, the engineer cannot visit. The director of the pharmaceutical company states, we can't afford to lose a week's worth of work, just treat all the equipment with hydrogen peroxide instead. Evaluate the possible impact this could have on the company. So here we have the AO1, where you're saying you could describe what autoclaving is in terms of its sterilization, whereas hydrogen peroxide is not going to sterilize, that's disinfection, and kind of leading on to we're applying and then analyzing and evaluate whilst also carrying through that quality of written communication. What we can do here to help prepare our students and to also help break that down so we can see tracking individual areas where our students are maybe strongest on or weaker on is creating a framework for these extended response questions. So the framework really breaking it down into AO1, AO2 and AO3. So what is the relevant knowledge? In this case, that would be disinfection, sterilization. How does this knowledge apply to the question? Well, these equipment need to be sterile because it's a pharmaceutical company. People consume, this is involved in medication, therefore sterility is important. What are the implications of possible outcomes? That identifying those AO3 marks. This would be such as there could be costs for the company, there could be backlash, someone could get ill. This would be far worse than waiting a week. So there's kind of several sides for this. First, you could get, like we said, getting your students to do these questions. So you create them and you have your students answer them and use that to track formative assessment. But also you could get your students to create these questions. So have them understand what the different assessment objectives mean. have them understand what the demands are of a question. And in creating a bank, you could help them develop those skills and also use them to assess other students. So I'm now going to go through the additional support that we have available. So we have Tracy and myself recently recorded a T-level health and science resources to support delivery. So this webinar contains a lot of interesting resources to help you with your delivery of the health and science T-levels. And we detail them and explain some, including loads of links in the description. So you can find this on our YouTube channel, just search for the title. Additionally, we've also recently released the student packs. So these are pathway specific packs. There's an exam pack and an ESP pack for each pathway. And you can find these on the Qual Hub page for each of the pathways. Just scroll down in the support materials. Here we're showing the employer set project student pack. So this pack contains loads of activities that you could do with your students. You can either set them these activities to do at home in the holidays, and then you assess them in class or do peer marking and feedback to help you with tracking those, again, that formative assessment. But also they include many of the things that Tracy and myself were talking about earlier. So those key terminologies, the justification and evaluation. There's lots of guides as well as exercises that you could use to help with your students. So they're definitely worth a check out. They're all free. You can find them on our website. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you found the session useful with supporting you with your teaching and delivery. If you have any queries, you are more than welcome to message either me or Tracy. Thank you very much.
Thank you.